Hello Bareyogis, it's Ashley and I'm very excited to share with you some things that I've learned about my elective, which is chair yoga or adaptive yoga. So I first got interested in this specific topic because during my practice I have encountered a lot of people, including my parents and some of my friends who think, oh, yoga's not for me, you're so flexible, you're so fit, but that's not really for me. So it got me really interested in how do we, make yoga accessible for everyone, which one of the ways we can do that is through finding easier practices. Let me backtrack a little bit because it's not necessarily easy. That's kind of actually a misconception. That chair yoga is an easier form of yoga. Not necessarily. There are some really challenging things that we could use for chair yoga. Even myself, I find it's a helpful tool to be able to use just to deepen our practice. And the chair yoga is just really just a start, because we could use a lot of different props, and even if we're using a chair, for instance, we could still use other props within that. So we could use bolsters, we could use pulling out some foam rollers, we could use these, placing these underneath our seats or our underneath our feet. We can roll out our feet that way. We can also use straps. We could use blocks, and all different types of props, including the chair. So, and we're also able to focus on some of the other components of yoga, because typically we're talking about, like within yoga, the 8-limb path of yoga. We really focus a lot on the postures or asanas, but we can, if we're doing chair yoga and not focusing so much on the postures, that can allow us to look at the other 8 limbs of yoga, including breath or pranayama. Some of my favorite classes during my practice, there was a study on the yamas and the niyamas, so looking at those more closely, and meditation. So there's so many different benefits that we could use, just using chair yoga as like a segue to be able to deepen our practice. And when I thought of chair yoga at first, I was thinking, oh, it's for elderly people specifically, or most often, but that's also not necessarily true. People in wheelchairs already are sitting and can be using chair yoga, but even able-bodied people who get injured, I know myself, even through this practice or through this yoga teacher training, I have definitely had days where I'm like, oh, that wrist hurt, and I wasn't able to practice for a couple days at first, until I found out, oh, there are many different ways we can adapt, or like if we have a wrist injury, we could work on a different part of our body. So yeah, finding many different ways to be able to adapt. And so I'm gonna go through a couple different sequences that we could do in chair yoga. A lot of times we can focus on our arms and adapt any posture. Say for cat and cow, we can still use that same flexion and extension of our spines, and we can actually kind of use the chair to deepen it. And I'm gonna just turn so you can see a little bit better of what I'm doing. But instead of just we're sitting in the chair and just using it as a posture, we can actually use it to our benefit. And if we're pushing, we can use that to really go deeper into the pose. So even if I am able to do a cat-cow on the floor, personally, but this feels a lot different, and I feel like I can go a lot deeper because there is an assisted range of motion and an unassisted range of motion when you're moving. So we could use the chair to help us get into an assisted range of motion with these postures. So we're pushing and pulling, And we can use either the back of the chair if it has a back or the sides for that same exact flexion and extension. Flexion and extension. And again, connecting our breath, so we might rush through this posture if we're, doing a regular asana practice on the floor. We might want to rush through cat-cow, but if we're seated and we can really focus this on our breath and our intention, and really hold these a lot longer, connecting in and out, in and out. And I'm going to turn back this way. So we've got our cat-cow, and we can also do our lateral side body stretches in the same way. We can use the chair to get into a more assisted range of motion. So really pushing up through the chair on this left side in order to push to my right side. And also, since this chair has a back, because we have all different kinds of chairs, right? I can use that to make sure that I'm not dipping back and closing off my rib cage. You can also use the chair to give you a better sense of alignment, in the same way that we can use our mats to help us with an alignment. We can use our chairs to give us more equal force on each side. Coming back down. And again, we can push through our arms. A lot of flexion, extension, lateral movement of the spine we can do in the chairs just as we were on the floor. We could also use this time to focus on our necks. So we can roll out our necks in the same way we could in any other posture practice. And also working a lot on our shoulders, right? So we can still, any of the upper body movements that we do to release our shoulders and our backs, we can do those the exact same way in the chair. And then another thing that we can focus on is also something which we don't really have a lot of time to go into, usually in our 40-minute yoga classes or hour-long yoga classes, are the different mudras and the bandhas. We could really use this time to go in a little bit deeper to that, just so people know that you might not be doing your regular yoga practice, but even if you are a seasoned practitioner, you still have so much that you can get from a seated yoga class. But just to continue a little bit more on the different variations of things, basically any posture could be adapted to a seated posture. And I'm already in half of one right now. So take your Garudasana or eagle pose. You've got your right leg crossed over, and we can do our arms just the same. Right arm under left, and pulling away from our face. And on the other side, same, crossing over, left leg over right, and then bringing your left arm under your right arm. Same, eagle arms with that crossed over. And then another misconception that I also had is that you always have to be seated in chair yoga. And I actually found, because one thing that maybe some people haven't done is they haven't actually been to a chair yoga class. Like if you are a advanced yogi that you like to take a lot of hot yoga and classes like that, maybe you've never actually been to a chair yoga class with an elderly, with mostly elderly people, but they actually get up and down out of their chairs sometimes. Not everyone is able to, but if you are able to, you can use the chair just as another prop. And one really, really excellent way of using that is using it to create a flat back, and really using it to stretch out your back in this way. And in the same way, you can use it as a kind of like you would as like a bar in a dance class. You're just using it more for stability. So having the chair here, but you can use it in standing postures, just as a tool, just in case, really. And that gives a lot of people a lot of comfort, but also really knowing your audience and who you're going to be teaching is really helpful for that, because there might be times that you aren't able to use the chair as a standing prop, but knowing that that is available if you are a teacher, you don't have to have everything seated if a lot of your people have more mobility. Let's see. Other populations that can be really served with chair yoga are people with mental disabilities, and so that's a population that I've been working with, people with autism. They really, really benefit from movement, and also just the different, ways of just everyone benefits from yoga. And being included and having a form of exercise that can be adapted. But one other thing that like people don't necessarily think about when you're teaching yoga to people who are elderly or people who have learning disabilities is you're not always able to use the left and right cues because people might have trouble knowing their left from their right, and so really learning how to cue in more inclusive ways. So bending over to one side and then to the other side, and also knowing, especially if you are using left and right cues, that people might not understand mirroring, so they're going to be mirroring whichever side that you go to. So yeah, chair yoga as a gateway into accessibility, and there's a long history of making yoga more accessible. So from my studies, it does seem that there's a long history of it being more of a guru would help a specific student, and there are times where like I have heard one of my teachers talk about like a lot of people try to touch their arms to their ankles in bridge pose, when really that was a cue for one specific student that was given that cue, and it just stuck with everyone in yoga, and we really all shouldn't be moving that way because that was for that one person that those instructions were given for. And I do feel like it is the same, for example, for pigeon, so many of us are trying to bring our shins parallel to the front of the mats, when really that's not going to be accessible for so many people. And so this is just one of the ways, chair yoga is just one of the ways that we can make it more accessible, but there's so many other ways that we can really do that as a community. Even looking at our props that we tell people to use. So for example, instead of a yoga block, which very few people are really going to have at home unless they do yoga, you could tell people, just grab a stack of books, right? So if you're teaching a class that's online, or people are telling people, at home, if you want to be adapting poses, you can take 2 books, or maybe a big dictionary, and use that just as a block. And then the same way with bolsters, people might not have a bolster at home, so they're like, oh, I'm not going to try to use a bolster for my at-home practice, when really, like, you could just use a couch cushion or like a really sturdy bed pillow In the same way with like yoga belts, you don't necessarily have to use a yoga belt, you can just use a regular belt, right? So how many ways can we make yoga more accessible? So thank you so much. It's been a joy and a privilege. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you. This is a lifelong study and it's just the beginning. Thank you so much.